This is Tim.
And Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim on Skype in Tokyo with Mulele also in Tokyo. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm also on Skype.
Oh, really? Oh, what a coincidence. So am I. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so of course this is the show where we read comics that you send in, and we read at least 30 pages of them, and more if we stay interested, or sometimes even if we don't. And then we talk about them here and try to give some tips where necessary. Okay, let's.
But I would like to say just on that, if we're interested, or sometimes even if we're not, it sounds really loaded. And I'd like to say that it's not that bad, but in fact, it is that bad.
Well, actually, it's relevant to our comics today because Collapse, the first one we're going to talk about, is one where after 30 pages I was not in.
Okay.
So I should say this is the first 6 issues of a series collected in a book, was published by Rising Sun Comics. The writers are R.P. Foster and Russ Pirozek, penciled by Pablo Lordi, inked by Jake Isenberg, and letters by Eduardo Camacho. And so the first 30 pages were basically the first issue. And so this is a post-apocalyptic story, which right there for me was, well, I mean, in the history of doing this podcast, we've received quite a few post-apocalyptic stories. And it's not a favorite genre of mine to begin with. And a lot of those stories had problems. And I didn't find them very interesting.
So why do you dislike post-apocalyptic stories?
I
mean, if you can think of any of the really good post-apocalyptic stories, just off the top of your head.
I don't know. I think I just don't like the setting. The setting makes me so uncomfortable that I just don't want to read or watch it.
Okay.
I think it's a really basic thing about the genre itself.
Right, okay.
Anyway, so it's post-apocalyptic, and so it's 19 years after the war, in which apparently, well, we see there were mushroom clouds, so clearly nuclear bombs were dropped. And it caused some people to turn into mutants, or perhaps most people. It's a little hard to tell. We're centered on some unmutated humans who are in an underground bunker that had been built by this scientist in case of a war, and it came in handy. And the first chapter, to me, felt too talky. I mean, it's important to, introduce your characters and set up the relationships and everything. And I think we've talked about some other stories recently where that didn't happen. Ant Farm comes to mind. This kind of felt like the opposite at the beginning, because I wasn't getting any. There's tension with the fact that there's been a nuclear war and they're in an underground bunker, we had that. There's a flashback at the beginning setting that up, but then pretty much the rest of the issue, I didn't really feel much tension. It felt kind of everyday, almost, the conversation between the characters. And I didn't feel a lot of forward progress there. And at 30 pages, I almost bailed.
Almost bailed.
And I thought, well, the art is pretty good, and it's quite accomplished, actually. And I feel like they're setting up a lot of stuff here. I'm going to stick with it. And after maybe 2 or 3 chapters, I really wanted to finish it.
So you mean like after 90 pages?
Yeah, I can't remember. Maybe it was in chapter 2 that chapter 2, it kind of started picking up, and we had, one of the people was talking to someone from outside secretly, and that person from the outside was going to come, unknown to the rest of the people in the bunker, and that was kind of interesting. I think that was set up in the 2nd chapter, and then I wanted to read the rest of it, and I read the whole thing.
Okay.
And I was glad I did, actually.
Okay.
So, they almost lost me there on the 1st chapter, but which is a little bit of a problem, I would say, although other people might find it more interesting than I did in the 1st chapter. But for me, that didn't seem like there was enough momentum in the 1st chapter.
Right.
But what made me the most interested in it was that there was some social commentary to it. And so, these people who have been in the bunker for, going on 20 years, they see these mutated people outside as monsters, and, they can't imagine the idea of themselves becoming mutants. That's something that they absolutely have to avoid.
Yeah.
And they don't trust these mutated people at all. The mutants are proud of their mutation. Someone actually said, "I'm proud of being a mutant." And they see these people from the bunker as like people, leftovers from the past who are not, with the program, and in fact, it was the humans in the bunker who fired the first shot in what turns into an escalating battle,
Right.
Through to the end of this volume, and I thought that was really interesting. So that was what really kept me with it when I realized it was. I guess it was more like by halfway through. By that point, I was continuing on, like, oh, this is interesting. So yeah, that kept me going to the end. And both sides are morally ambiguous, because the mutants are not pacifists. Once they get shot, they're ready to fight back.
Yeah.
So, they're not all the good guys either. But other than the slow start, I think the only other criticism I would have of it is that sometimes I couldn't follow the reading order of not just word balloons, but panels sometimes.
Interesting.
I wasn't quite sure what the order was. But otherwise, I thought it was really interesting. How far did you read in this?
How far do you think I read?
30 pages?
Yep,
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
I was out after
you
the
fell.
first.
Yeah, you fell out at the place I almost fell out.
Well, you usually have a lot more stick-to-itiveness with some of these ventures, but
That's true.
Now, I'm kind of hearing how the story developed. I can see it. There's a bit where they talk about a book that the guy's reading, and he's actually reading I Am Legend, and the book is a little bit different from the film. The film is with Will Smith, and basically he becomes the last man walking through the desert with his dog, or maybe the dog died, I don't remember. But in the book, basically, it's an evolutionary thing, and he's the last holdover of that evolutionary stage of humans. And these new people who seem just like horrible monsters to him, actually sit him down and talk to him at the end and tell him that this is what it is.
I see.
I don't remember hearing how violent or non-violent it was. I didn't actually read the book myself. But kind of seeing that, I can see the parallels between this and that. But I can also see them taking a cue from The Walking Dead, which is very talky in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
Some stylistic similarities to it as well, being a black and white book.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem that I had with this is that, yeah, there was no forward momentum because there was no story. It's just showing everyday life and what these people are. But none of these people are that compelling that I really cared. And when she's doing the really tearful goodbye at the end of the first episode, I'm like, why though? These people have been doing this for 20 years. It also kind of seemed weird to me that they're growing chickens and fish in their bunker. And it struck me as odd. It's like, wouldn't it be better to grow potatoes? Like that guy who got stuck on Mars in that movie.
Yeah, I did kind of have questions about their food source there, but
yeah, and also there's a scene where they actually finally get to a garden, and the garden is everything's in planters. There's no soil on the ground, none of that. And I was like, what a weird way to make a garden. But when they got to it, they're like, oh yeah, take whatever you need, and if there's something you can't find, I can get it for you. It's like, what the fuck is this? After 20 years of being careful with your food, and you're like, yeah, take whatever. Man, you take a lima bean, that shit's gonna be checked off of a check sheet. It's gonna be tighter than the worst supply Nazi in whatever company you can imagine for getting erasers and pencils. Man, they're not going to fuck with it. Or they're going to have some goop like they had in The Matrix, where everybody's dreaming of filet mignon, but they're actually eating just protein goop. And so I really had problems with that. And the logic just seemed not to flow for me, and the characters were not interesting. And they took 30 pages to show me nothing. Bouncing ahead, I could see that, okay, there's a little bit of intrigue in number 2, so they get some fights, and then in chapter 3, finally the outside element comes in. It's like, man, none of the groundwork for that was laid in chapter 1. You can't tell me that chapter 1 was necessary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, if I were picking up issue 1 off the newsstand and read issue 1 and, to make the effort to go out and buy issue 2, I might not have.
Oh, I definitely wouldn't have. And I would have been pissed that I bought that shit. And the next time I saw the author working on some project, I'd be like, nah, his last one kind of sucked. And that's really a shame. If you say that it picked up and it got better and it's worth reading and you're glad you stuck it through, that first chapter does such a disservice to the rest of the story and to the writer himself.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of sorry that it is that way, especially since you feel that it turned around so nicely. But yeah, I couldn't get through that first one. It was nonsense.
I had one other slight criticism. Much of the middle of the book has like all of the human characters in these kind of hazmat suits.
Yeah.
And you can see their full faces through the front of the hood, but I still had some confusion about who was who. That was kind of frustrating.
Every time, even without the hazmat suit, someone said, "Dad," I was like, "Wait a minute, you don't look like you don't look like your father." I felt that the character designs weren't distinct enough.
There was another problem. Even you're right. Before the hazmat suits, some of the characters looked a little too similar.
Yeah. So I was having some trouble with that. But one other thing. For being in a bunker for 19 years, I would I would assume that eventually someone would come up with some sort of plan. Not let's hang out, have movie night watching Casablanca.
Which they actually do in chapter 1.
Yeah, I think someone in there would be, okay, what we're going to do is you people over there are going to make as many babies as you can, and we're going to try and grow ourselves as a group. Otherwise, you're looking at the end of stuff, and you're just waiting for shit to die, and that kind of stuff. You'd be dealing a lot more with suicide. You'd be dealing a lot more with people just walking outside without a hazmat suit. There'd be stealing, there'd be chaos, there'd be a lot of shit. The worst in people come out when there's no hope. And if you're just gonna hang out, like, you know, it's Taco Tuesday or some shit, and you're gonna watch some TV, it didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, now that you mention it, there is quite a dearth of procreation going on among, you know, there's enough people there of both sexes that you would think there would be a few babies. There's the one girl who's something like 16, and her backstory ends up being a big reveal later on, which I won't spoil in case anybody wants to read it. But yeah, other than her, I mean, there's no one there younger than her, which is, yeah, kind of surprising if you think about it.
Yeah, you think about all of the 9/11 babies that happened. Even for these people in the bunker, I think there'd be a couple of 19-year-old babies, or 18-year-old babies, I guess. Because, you know, end of the world, well, you're just going to bang it out until you're done.
Yeah, well, and those 19-year-olds would be old enough to be
banging
doing
out
it with each other.
Yeah. And so there just seemed to be no forethought or thought about the history of what went on there. It's like, okay, there are people in this thing, and this is what they do because, you know, this is what they do. Go ahead. I was going to say that society, being the last of society, I think society would change dramatically, and it just seems not to be thought about here.
I also had a bit of a question that the group is surprisingly ethnically diverse.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand how that happened, because presumably they were all living in the same area, and unless there was this diverse group that I guess because they are maybe, a lot of them are scientists, and maybe they have been working together in the same lab or something, but I don't recall that ever being explained.
Well, I mean, I find the question rather odd, especially coming from a white man living in Tokyo. So people are wherever they are, and I think at this point we're not so ethnically segregated, even in the countries that made no attempts to integrate, like Japan. And to be honest, just on a slight tangent here, from day one in Japan, all I've heard is, we are Japanese, you are not. And on the one hand, it's kind of a relief, because I'm no longer the black guy who talks white, or the kind of black guy, or the not quite white guy, or whatever it is you want to call me. I'm now just the foreigner. And it's like I'm in a bigger minority group.
Okay.
And it's actually, there's no pressure here, because as the not quite black guy, there's, or at least when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I guess more 80s than 90s. But when I was growing up in San Francisco, and mind you, this is San Francisco. It's fairly, at the time, liberal place. I'm getting the feeling that it's less liberal now that,
Silicon Valley.
yeah, now that it is what it is. But yeah, being told that I had to talk a certain way because I looked a certain way. There's some really fucked up shit. It was the most segregationist shit that I heard. Now, granted, it's not as bad as some of the shit my father went through, or his father. But I don't have any of that in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
There's no expectation here. And when I spout off knowing some shit about Japan that maybe the average Japanese person doesn't know, it's like, oh shit, you really know your stuff. And that's the end of it. And so, yeah, as far as this situation goes, the fact that there are many races, I think is actually to the credit of the writer or artist or whoever decided to put that in there, because having a diverse group of people is a nice thing to see. Representation.
Sure, I imagine that was the thought. It just I kind of wanted to understand, what the background of that combination of people was. But
well, I mean, even if it was just a group of one race, you'd still want to know what the background was and how they got here. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was pointing to earlier. It seems to have just a lack of understanding, or a lack of history.
Yeah.
I should say, which makes the 19-year thing seem really arbitrary. Mm-hmm. They kind of act like they're still in their first year, or maybe even the first couple of months of the bunker, especially with what they're making and how cavalier they are with their food supply. I did look up on a website, I think it's called Ask a Survivalist, which foods are the best to grow. And they listed a whole bunch of vegetables. At the top was beans. Mm-hmm. Because beans are easy to grow in all kinds of soil. They actually help the soil. They enrich the soil as they grow. And they can be dried and stored. So you can eat them off season. And they can be eaten in so many different ways. And they're a large part of a perfect food source.
A lot of protein, right?
Food staple, yeah. Protein, and basically the idea of beans and rice, and you can survive. They did do I don't know if it was a study exactly, but they did say, or I have heard, that if you have a wheat-based diet and you can only eat bread, you will starve to death. But if you have only rice, and it's not even including beans, but only rice, it'll be a really hard fucking life, but you will not starve. Because the amount of nutrients in rice actually are superior to the nutrients in wheat. And so wheat is actually kind of a weak staple. So,
okay.
Yeah, beans and rice, man. Okay. Not chickens and fish.
Okay, well, when the apocalypse happens, I'll keep that in mind.
Please do.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky podcast network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
Okay, so back in May 2017, episode 111 of Critiquing Comics, we talked about a comic called Evil Witch Allie by Kristin Tipping. And she wrote to us recently and said, "Hi, thank you for your previous critiques. Please take a look at Volume 2 of Allie when you get a chance." And actually, we talked about her animal book not too long ago also.
Yeah. Actually, from what I remember about Evil Witch Allie, I remember really, really liking it.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that I followed her on Twitter. I think I also followed her sister, who also does comics, I think, if I'm not misremembering. I think I used to get them confused, though. But anyway, sorry, Kristin. But anyway, I really, really liked the comic, and I thought it was lovely. But I did think that Evil Witch Allie was not quite evil. But maybe therein lies the joke. So just to kind of preface whatever we say or whatever I say in this review with that.
Okay, so this is a webcomic, and you can also buy Volume 1 as a paperback on Amazon. And I went back and read from the beginning because I couldn't remember what happened in Volume 1. So I read, from the beginning to the present.
Right.
She finished Volume 2 online, and she's just starting Volume 3. Like 1 or 2 pages at the time we're recording. I felt like she had really upped her game compared to the first one. The art felt different somehow, like she had changed her process. I don't know if she went from paper to digital or what she's changed, or maybe she just kind of tightened it up somehow. But it looks really nice, and the story for Volume 2 also, I couldn't put my finger on it, but somehow it just feels more mature.
Okay.
I don't know, how did you feel? I mean, did you get that sense also?
Yeah, I thought the first book was really good. I didn't go back and reread it. I thought it might be good too, but I didn't quite have the time. Sorry.
It doesn't have a lot of bearing on Volume 2, really. Some of the same characters, but
it's the jumping off point. There were a few moments of, what happened? And who are these characters again?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of Volume 2 it mentions the bog from Volume 1, but
yeah,
we're moving on to something else here.
Yeah, I think she may have simplified her process a little bit. It's a little less rough around the edges, a lot smoother than the first bit. Maybe more digital. But I think there's also a kind of a sureness in the way she moves the story and the panels. Because the thing is, if I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, Evil Witch Allie is kind of introduced in the beginning of of the first book and kind of carries through the entire book. But this one, she's not really introduced so much. We're dealing with the, what's his name?
So Jake.
Yeah, Jake. We're dealing with his stuff for the first half of the book. And then somewhere around page 40, Evil Witch Allie comes in. And I didn't find it, I was not disappointed. I didn't feel that something was necessarily missing. It was interesting by itself, which is a little bit weird considering the star of the book is not showing up for a bit. But I did kind of feel like she was feeling much more comfortable with her storytelling and her characters, and it is well done.
Yeah, I guess what I'm sensing is it somehow feels more confident.
Yeah. Although I do have to say, I was not able to finish the entire chapter. I got about 60 pages in before I had to stop. And I stopped because of a time constraint, not at all because of any boredom or anything, because it is interesting to watch them kind of deal with the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say, actually, compared to the last comic we just read, this is one where the story is kind of hanging out in the background, but the writer is in no hurry to get to it. Mm-hmm. But the story is there. You can feel that something is slowly moving forward. But the characters themselves are interesting enough that that's okay. Yeah. And the artwork is clear. It's really clear. Mm-hmm. Well done. So in that sense, yeah, I don't. I never felt like something was missing here. Oh, one little shout out. On page 8, the mother says to her 2 kids, "Kids, are you up yet?" And then we have this last panel from the mother's point of view, looking at nothing basically, but from around the corner comes this word balloon with 2 tails saying "Yes, ma'am." And it just, the kids saying "Yes, ma'am" in tandem, represented by the 2 tails, I thought was kind of clever. I liked it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So what I've read so far, up to page 57, how many pages are there?
Oh boy. So yeah, I'm looking at the archive page. This is called Book of Secrets, and it has 123 pages.
Yeah, so I only got halfway through. So I've still got a long ways to go. But I mean, I was just getting into the plot as I had to stop. So I think the last page I read, or just about the last page I read, one of the kids was beginning to learn how to read the book, it seemed. I mean, stuff was beginning to appear to her.
Yeah, I think you're talking about where Molly is looking in the book and that kind of red thing appears.
Yeah. So just after that is where I stopped reading. But yeah, I liked it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I found a little puzzling sometimes, and it's the kind of story where you're never quite sure if what you think you see is what's actually happening. But yeah, it's interesting. I might need to read it a second time to make sure I understood it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on, especially considering how simple the illustration style is, and it's actually much simpler than the first book was. It's a lot rougher. There's a little bit more detail, but this one, everything seems to be one stroke and you're done kind of line work. Whereas before is much more sketchy. But it kind of contrasts to this kind of complex, what did I actually just see?
Yeah, I think the story is more complex where the art is simpler.
Yeah. And no, I still like it, and I will be reading through after the podcast, of course. But I also stand by my feeling about the first book, which even 2 years later in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, that was a good book. So I wholeheartedly recommend.
Yeah,
this.
me too. Yeah.
Sorry, man. The good reviews are short.
Yep. Yep, it's always true.
Mm.
In a moment, we throw in the towel on a Spider-Man MCU deal, at least for now. And for the first time in months, an update on Mulele's comics career. First, don't forget that you can support this and all our podcasts by pledging a monthly donation at patreon.com/deconcomics. As we've hit several goals recently, we've unlocked early Deconstructing Comics episodes that have been unavailable since our current site was set up more than a decade ago. Our patrons have currently unlocked classic episodes back to number 60, and I'm releasing one per week in reverse order. This week, episode 92 from September 10th, 2007, in which Mulele and I talk about how comics are discussed in the media, the decompression of comic storytelling, and more. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page. If you support us at any tier, you can receive these early episodes in an RSS feed in your podcast app. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics. Now back to the show. So, just a little bit of update on the Spider-Man MCU thing that we incessantly talk about.
Yeah.
There's a September 5th article on Variety.com where they quote the Sony Pictures chairman, Tony, can I pronounce this name? Vinciquerra, who says, for the moment, the door is closed on Spider-Man returning to the MCU. So, although it says that he cryptically added that it's a long life, implying that perhaps in the distant future, the web-slinging hero might swing his way back to the Disney-owned company.
Yeah.
So, and I read some of the comments, too, and there's a lot of, there's a variety of things being expressed. A lot of it is that Sony makes bad Spider-Man movies, and other people are saying, what do you mean? They made a lot of money. But, I don't know. I mean, of course, the first two from going on 20 years ago now are pretty well regarded, but the others, some of them were, I guess, questionable.
Yeah.
We will be getting to them all on the Patreon show eventually, even though they're not MCU movies. But so you said you had some comments on this, and as someone who watched all the movies, you're a little more qualified to talk about this than I am. But I haven't seen any of them yet at this point. So what did you have to say about this?
Yeah, well, first off, about them not reaching a deal, shocked. I'm shocked here. And I can't believe that they actually decided not to go that way. Actually, I can believe that Sony believes that they can make it without Marvel. I don't believe that it's true, though.
Yeah.
Now, the thing of it is, Sony was looking at Venom as, this could work, maybe. And then it worked more than they expected it to. Mm-hmm. Despite critics just lambasting that film as shit, fans still really appreciated it, even though the story beats are off, the acting is hammy, the special effects are sometimes a mess to look at, and in general, there are a lot of times where I just find myself going, why though? So yeah, I think it was kind of a lucky shot, ricocheting off a barn door and hitting their target.
Yeah, well, and also one of the commenters was saying, the approach that worked with Venom would not work with Spider-Man, that they would get a lot of flack online, probably.
Yeah. Now they, given the comments by the CEO, who was the CEO of Sony, CEO of Sony Pictures.
Yeah.
Okay. Given his comments, it sounds like they've got these big plans, and they believe that they can. I think part of his comment was that Kevin Feige is very talented, but they've also got talented people on their side, and Spider-Man has always been popular, and they've always made good movies. But the ventures into the MCU, those event films, made it even more popular. And now that they're going to introduce their own cinematic universe, which I believe they're hoping will rival, even topple Marvel's cinematic universe. Now, here's the thing. Without spoiling anything for you, any more than things have been spoiled, Avengers Endgame was kind of the end of an era for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there are a lot of people who've decided, okay, I'm kind of done with this train. I mean, it's been a long ride. 22 films in 11 years is a lot, so good. And not going to follow it on from here, especially when we're looking at the future slate of MCU films, and most of them are unknowns to people who don't follow comics, comic books. So some people are looking at that and saying that, okay, well, Marvel's weaker than they've been since they started this shit. They're essentially starting fresh. And their ace in the hole was supposed to be Spider-Man. Now that's gone. So Sony taking Spider-Man back means that there's a vacuum to be filled. And since they have the actor who was in the Marvel movies, there's some synergy there that will add to their box office. So it's actually a smart move for Sony to take Spider-Man back. Yeah, I can see all of that stuff, except let's not forget that the actor who plays Spider-Man was not Sony's choice. Sony didn't want him. They wanted Asa Butterfield, who was the star of Ender's Game. That was his big film before this current actor. Sorry, what's the name of the actor? Holland?
Tom Holland.
Yeah. So Tom Holland was Marvel's choice. Marvel came in and said, no, this is Spider-Man, not Asa Butterfield, because it was up between those two. And now they've got Tom Holland, but of course MJ and those characters will probably fade out because they're part of the MCU, not a part of Spider-Man. And Spider-Man himself that actor will play Peter Parker, will play Spider-Man, and he's a good fit for that because he is that physical of an actor as well, and you kind of can believe that that's him underneath all that shit. But the MJ in the MCU is gone. His friends are gone. Any of the other support characters are gone. Any of the connections are gone. So they're going to have to soft reboot this shit. Now, I bring up the Asa Butterfield thing to say that this is where Sony fails. It's not that they don't have a good character. It's not that they don't have the right license, because they do. And they could, in fact, any really competent company putting on their A game and with vision can make a Spider-Man cinematic universe to rival the Marvel Cinematic Universe and win. That is actually a logical conclusion. But when it's Sony, that kind of comes into doubt because they've been really hit or miss with a lot of their stuff. They've had a couple of hits, but those hits were greenlit by people who are no longer in those positions at Sony. So we're looking at new teams. Amy Pascal is still involved with some of that stuff. But the other person who is involved with it, I forgot his name. It's Amy Pascal and one other producer. that I just looked him up to. Sorry, I can't remember his name. But anyway, that other producer has produced only a couple of things. They've been B grade or C grade dramas, but he's now in charge of Spider-Man. He's never produced a superhero flick. And Amy Pascal is hit or miss. Hit with Kevin Feige or hit with the not Russo brothers, sorry, Lord and Miller with Into the Spider-Verse. That was also Amy Pascal. So there's some hope for people who like those films. But kind of going forward, Lord and Miller, if they want to be a part of that, then they will bring gold to Spider-Man. But if they're not, then that's a whole other thing. And meanwhile, because of the sorry, let me back up a little bit. They tried to make a Spider-Verse when they saw this Marvel shit coming up with the previous actor. I forget his name, but he was in
Garfield.
Yeah, Andrew Garfield.
Andrew Garfield, yeah.
Yeah. So with our Andrew Garfield, who apparently the rumor has it that he was fired because he slighted Sony's CEO at the time in some party in Rio de Janeiro. I don't know. But people kind of allude to the idea that he got himself fired. But whatever that is, those films were not good. Regardless of the background drama, what you saw on the screen wasn't that interesting, wasn't compelling. And especially that second one, which was supposed to super perform, it underperformed. And so their Spidey universe that they were beginning to build, and you can see it with, they had Paul Giamatti in some bullshit role as the Rhino. And, I mean, Spider-Man is the only superpowered person. Actually, that's not even true. Sorry, I'm talking bullshit. The Rhino was a techno villain, not a superpowered person, which was kind of disappointing. Yeah. But Paul Giamatti as a superpowered person seems a little weird. I mean, he's got the anger for it, but he doesn't have the the physical prowess of it. But basically, they were trying to build towards a Sinister Six thing, and they even ended that film with a shot of all these different techno suits that they had lying around this company that was going to kind of set it all up. And so you had the Vulture's wings, you had Doc Ock's arms, you had I think a couple of other things, but the Sinister Six stuff, the Spidey universe, all of that shit died when that film died and Andrew Garfield got fired. Then they said, okay, send it to Marvel, see what happens. And so they sent it to Marvel. The shit blew up big. Venom also blew up surprisingly because, you know, I don't know about you, but I didn't think Venom would work when I saw those promos. And then when I saw the film, this is ridiculous garbage, but it still blew up. And so now they don't have a Spideyverse, they got a Venomverse. And so now they're going to shoehorn Spider-Man into the Venomverse. They're also going to they also teased that Woody Harrelson would be Carnage at the end of Venom. So people are looking forward to that. They're going to shoehorn Spider-Man into that when it's not necessarily a Spider-Man story. So it already sounds like they're beginning to misuse the character. And if they're going to start using him for cameos without his own film, I think they're going to think it's going to work because that's the way they did it with Marvel. I think at this point, that actor playing Spider-Man, soft reboot, he needs his own film, his own couple of films. If those films hit, then Sony, great. If they're making good films, then that's fine. I've got no problems with that. Marvel doesn't need to own everything, or rather, Disney doesn't need to own everything. But if those films crash and burn, which I think might be the case, given their track record, given the slipshod way they're kind of setting shit up, And given that they don't have a Feige on their side, and it doesn't have to be Feige himself, just anybody to be like, okay, this is the course that we're going on, and this is what I'm fighting for. They don't have that because they keep firing whoever fucks up in the last film. Without that, they're not going to make it. And so I still believe that Spider-Man may come back to the MCU. I don't know. And to be honest, at this point, I kind of don't care. I'll be out for a good film. I'm not a stan for Marvel or for Spider-Man. I just want to watch a couple of movies.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at with all of this stuff. I do believe the CEO's last comment about life is long does mean that, if we fuck up, he'll be back in the MCU. I mean, directly translated.
Yeah, that sounds likely.
Yeah. So the question is, how badly do they have to fuck up, and how quickly will it force them after that fuck up to get it back to the MCU? Disney will probably ask for a chunk.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of, well, at least what one of the commenters on the article said was, and I had not quite picked this up before, but I guess that the reason it kind of broke up was because Disney was asking for a bigger percentage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so Sony said, no, in that case, we're just going to take our property and go home and make our own Spider-Man movies, or movies with featuring other characters and Spider-Man as a cameo, like you said. Because I've seen a lot of this talk about making movies featuring other of the sort of Spider-Man related characters, like Silver Sable and the Black Cat and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know, it might work, but or it could be another Catwoman movie.
Oh, speaking of which, they are making a Catwoman, not a Catwoman movie. What was her name? Black Cat?
Black Cat. Yeah, I saw that name mentioned as a possible Sony movie.
Yeah, well, they were going to do, was it Black Cat, and what's the name of the other character? Silver
Sable.
Silver Sable, yeah. So it's going to be black and silver. Or silver. Oh,
yeah,
and black.
I think they're supposed to be together. Yeah, which I don't know that they've ever worked together in the comics, but who cares?
Yeah, but I mean, this is the thing. They're just trying anything. They've got no plan. And see, the thing of this, I think one of the reasons why the Marvel stuff worked is because when you're staring down like Thor 2 numbers, or I should say the reception more than the numbers. Maybe the numbers are okay, but the reception of Thor 2 was icy. And things are not quite going as planned, but you've kind of started to build towards this thing, and you've got this Thanos thing creeping around in the background. Kevin Feige was pretty fearless with that shit. He went forward. And I don't know how much he had to fight or how much he had to bargain or what he had to do to get that shit done, but he got through those times as well. I don't think Sony has that grit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, something like Guardians of the Galaxy that, a lot of comics fans were thinking this is going to be where they screw up. Then it ended up, being hugely popular and well made.
Yeah, and actually changed the style of the Marvel movies from that point on. Some people pointed out that there's more comedy in the Marvel films from that point forward. I found the name of the producer that'll be working with Amy Pascal. Tom Rothman.
Okay.
Who co-produced Down by Law in '86, which is a Jim Jarmusch film. It's not bad. Candy Mountain in '87. And then he's executive producer on The Program in '93. And then he's got producer credit on Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, set for 2020.
Okay. Well, that sounds like, he hasn't done any other movies since 1993?
93 and then 2020. And that's
Wow.
it for producer. He's got a couple of other credits as actor, writer, thanks self and archive footage. But, the main thing here is producer. And so he's not a star. He just may be in the position right now to do that. He did, I think, head up Paramount at one time. I'm not exactly sure. But he's been in a variety of positions, but as a movie producer, as a film producer, he's kind of thin, and he's not about superheroes. And I think someone else also mentioned that there will be some people involved in Spider-Man who were responsible for the Wolverine Origins movie, who, as producer, decided that Deadpool, the iteration of Deadpool that made it into that film, should not be able to speak.
Okay.
Yeah. The person that was responsible for that may, in fact, have something to do with these new Spider-Man films. So I don't have a lot of hope for this. Sorry, man. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's it. That's
okay.
all I got for Spider-Man.
Okay. So something that we used to do every time and have not done for months is to ask Mulele how his comics career is going. And I have no idea how his comics career is going because we haven't even talked about it off podcast. So what's new with your comics creation stuff?
Nothing much. Just a dog trying to get a bone, as they say.
So, what... Let's see. I'm not even sure what you're working on right now.
Okay, so a couple of things. So last year, I did I took part in the anthology for what was that one called? FTLEL from Iron Circus.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a story in that, and I also published Yakai in English. It was originally a Japanese comic.
Mm-hmm.
It won an award, which I still haven't gotten. And every time I talk to someone from that award group, they say, "Oh, you didn't get your award. Oh, and we misspelled your name on the website. We're so sorry. We'll fix immediately." And nothing happens. It's been like I've talked to like 3 or 4 different people now. It's like, oh my God, we're so sorry, and that's the end of it. 'Cause I'm actually thinking that I might make a comic about what it means to have your work honored in such a way, just to kind of lambast.
Honored, quote unquote.
Yeah, well, I mean, my thesis of the idea here, and I'm okay to kind of share this before writing it. If you're out in the middle of, all of this hoopla about comics, you're going to conventions, you're talking to people, you've got, every Wednesday at the local comic shop, you've got your you hold court because that's your shop. Then it's kind of okay. You've got your spot. But for me, I'm a creator here who's kind of detached from Japanese comics at this point. I don't read too many of them. All of my friends who do comics are independent creators. None of us are hardcore comic book readers at this point. We just make comics. We kind of make them in our own little bubbles. Sometimes we share shit. And I've been trying more and more to kind of reach out to different places to see if I can get any sort of play. And so I get some play from an award, and the award says, "Oh yeah, you won." Or someone sends me an email, says, "You won." Oh, great, shit, man. Well, let me try and record a video of me accepting the award, and that doesn't work because I'm so fucking bad on camera. If anybody has any doubts about that, go check out my Kickstarters and see me talking about my projects. It's fucking nonsense. But then I give them a quote that they can read at the awards ceremony. I'm waiting for it to appear on Facebook. Not only do they not do the award ceremony on Facebook or their own website or anywhere else, they also don't even announce who won the shit for the next month. And so I know that I won, but nobody else knows that I won. And I begin to even doubt that I won because no one's talking about it and there's no proof except some email that I got from a random person who says that they're from such and such office that is running the shit. And, there's nothing quite as lonely as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I won't make any weird comparisons, but, so finally, coming to this point where I've told them several times and it's still not addressed, I thought I'd just make a comic about my experience. Just make it can be a short comic, 16 pages, 32 pages, 120 pages, whatever it has to be, and then send it back to the awards ceremony that did this to me in the first place. And the only question is, do I want to name them or not? But I don't know. I think it's more interesting if I name them, but it's kind of like the ultimate fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's better if I just kind of let it go. But I do want to make a book. However, the reason why I don't make a book right now is because I'm too fucking busy. Here's the thing. I'm working currently on 2 projects that one I'm getting paid for, and so I have deadlines and all that stuff. And, getting paid means I can pay my bills, buy that comic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a comic called For the Kids. It's not out yet, and I have no idea what book company it's going to be coming out from. It's kind of being funded independently at the moment. So we're just in production. And I hate to say it, I've been really, really slow. We've been in production for a while. I'm hoping production will move a little bit faster now that we seem to have all the parts in place. And my life has kind of settled down. I've got another comic which I'm developing with a writer, which looks to be really, really interesting, but we've got some issues to work out with the script and some other stuff, and so I don't want to talk too much about that one yet. But what it means is that I'm hustling 2 projects there, and I'm not writer on either of those projects, which is a little bit painful because I like to write as well. I like to kind of create my own stuff. I did have a comic called Don't Touch My Fucking Bike, about my bike getting stolen and a trip I took over the mountains on my bicycle. But I haven't been able to write it for the past 2 years because I just don't have time.
Yeah, I guess it has been that long ago that you first mentioned it to me.
Yeah. I've also got an idea for a comic about a drug-addled assassin. I've got an idea to make a comic about this murder mystery that I've been working on for 20 years. 20 years? No, 25 years at this point. It's just been kind of gestating in my mind, and I finally, I'm gonna fucking do it. And I drew the first page, and then another project came my way, and it's like, okay, well, let me put this aside. And so I've also got Mind Gator, which is, parts 1 and 2 are out. Part 3, it's been waiting 2 years, and I'm still not doing anything with it. And it's going to be a while because my girlfriend, who's now moved into my house, as we are getting closer and closer to marriage, says, look, all those comics you've got in the closet that are taking up so much space, don't make another one. At least, if you're going to make another one, make sure it goes through a company. So I'm at the same time trying to hustle up some agent or somebody that will say, yeah, make that comic, we'll pay for it and we'll sell it for you. Rather than me printing 1,000 copies and then just holding them in my living room. This is the thing. When you start on a 4-issue limited series, that's 4,000 books, because the minimum print run from the printer that I'm using is 1,000 books.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, they say whatever your print run is for the 4th book, double it for the 1st book. So I should have actually printed 2,000 of the 1st book and not just 1,000, but I'm stupid, and it was my 1st book. So with all that, yeah, it's just kind of stuck in some sort of limbo.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So I mean, I've got a million projects that I want to get to, but I'm kind of stuck because I'm doing all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually been able to increase my my productivity, maybe a little bit of inside baseball at this point, but being an artist, working at home, and living with a girlfriend who doesn't see me produce, and so she says, well, I'm going off to work now, so don't forget to work, huh? And I gotta go, well, wait a minute, you don't know me. And then realize maybe she knows me at least a little bit. So,
and you close the YouTube tab on your computer in your browser.
Actually, no, I had to pick up my shit and leave the house. So now so one of the things, while I was teaching English, I would have maybe a 2 or 3 hour break during the day. And so I just bust out my comic pages and start writing there. And my productivity was pretty good. So I realized that, I kind of got to get back to that. And so now I hit up a coffee shop somewhere in Tokyo, wherever, is close to home or somewhere else where I need to be because I've got an appointment. And I draw there for about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually 4 hours a day. I'm trying to increase that, but it's kind of hard. So you buy 1 cup of coffee and sit there for 4 hours. Sometimes it's a little rough, but anyway, I'm doing that now because I don't have my own studio to kind of get out of the house and away from distraction. Mm-hmm. And it's really increased my performance. I've been able to get a lot done, but it's still not quite enough. And sitting in a cafe for 8 hours is a little bit more than I can handle at the moment. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty of other things I'd like to be working on too, but yeah, I have to get. I'm doing too much already, so.
Well, I'm actually waiting for the stunning conclusion or the stinging conclusion to the Spider Hag story. I want to know who wins the mayoral election. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to get back to that. Okay.
I was also hopeful for Space Barf as well.
Right. Yeah, that was something else I talked about. Well, the last time I worked on Space Barf, I was in high school, I think. Or, yeah, I guess it was high school. It's a little while ago. I've also had ideas for other things I'd like to do podcasts about, but there are only so many hours in a day.
True.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, yeah, we have gone over an hour here, so let's wrap this up.
Okay.
If you would like us to critique your comic, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. On Twitter, I am at DeconComics, and Mulele?
I'm at Mulele Redux, all one word, on Instagram and Twitter for the most part. I do upload a lot of art to, or not a lot of art, but I upload art to Instagram if you want to know what I'm working on. Sometimes I pop it over to Twitter as well, but Twitter, it's a lot of retweets about protests in Hong Kong and anti-Trump bullshit. So if you're down for that, hit me up on Twitter. If you're not, you just want artwork, then Instagram.
Yep. Okay, so now you're going to be traveling, and I've got other stuff going on also. So we're going to take a few weeks off, and it'll be Deconstructing Comics every week for the next, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And then we will be back, assuming that we get more comics. That's the other sort of hold up here. We've finished our queue. So till next time, this is Tim.
And Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. Since we recorded this, we have received one comic from a listener, but we do need more to critique, so please send us your comic. We expect to be back with Critiquing Comics on October 16th. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, we'll begin my 2-part interview with Dan Mishkin, co-creator of the 80s DC series Amethyst and Blue Devil, and the writer of the Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation. See you then.